Hey, Bond fans, welcome back to the Bond Report. Today, you probably already know what we're talking about. We're going to be going over Anthony Horowitz's second book, Forever and a Day. And joining me today, I have Chris Hunt, Blake Powers, Bond Life Chicago, British Bond addict. Guys, thank you so much for being here. How are you guys doing?
Doing awesome. Thanks for inviting us on again and looking forward to chatting with you guys about the book.
Yeah, doing well myself. I must say it's long day at work, absolutely pissing down with rain outside, and yeah, I've been looking forward to this.
But we're going to jump right into this. This year was my first year reading this book. Blake, and I don't know, have you guys read this prior to this year?
This is the first time that I read it also. I read it about 4 months ago, 3-4 months ago.
But so the first time I read it was actually when it came out in about 2018. It's one I wasn't expecting to pick up, but when I did, and it's like as soon as I got it, the train home, I was right. I'm going through this. Let's go.
For me, this, and I love Trigger Mortis. I've done a review on that, and I'll leave a link for that video at the end of this one so you guys can check that out. But I'm a huge fan of that. Me and Blake, we did a review on that one as well with Sam from Bond Up North, and we had a blast doing that one. And I think Horowitz has really got his finger on the pulse. But we're going to do some questions today. We're going to talk about some different elements of this book. And Blake, I'm going to start with you first. What was your overall impressions, of the book?
So I read this out of the 3 books that Horowitz wrote. I read this one third. I read Forever and a Day first because it had just come out. I wanted to read a book as it came out. Then I read Trigger Mortis, and then I read this one to kind of at least get those 2 in order. So I kind of already had a good idea of what Horowitz and his writing style was for Bond, and I really enjoyed the book overall.
Very strong. Chris?
Loved Trigger Mortis when it first came out, and certainly this is stick strongly with me, but this was such an improvement. The first book with Horowitz, I've read quite a few of Horowitz's books. I feel like he's still trying to adjust to the style of Fleming. And in this one, he really nailed it. In the third, his own style takes over. But this really did feel like a classic Bond novel. And that's saying something, especially considering this is a prequel. I mean, that's a risky thing to do anyway.
Right.
But I think he pulled it off, and it's a really enjoyable, fun read. I was talking to somebody about it, and they said it's akin to like a Brosnan Bond film. Just one you can read, it's done, and you have a great time with it. And I completely agree. This is the Pierce Brosnan Bond book. Like, you just sit down, read it. You don't have to have any preamble, anything like that, and you get all the Bond notes. Well, you get most of the Bond notes introduced, which I find funny.
Yes.
Right, and that kind of leads me into where I was going to say is, like, I feel like one of the best parts about the fact that this is a prequel is that it does explain a lot of the Bond tropes that we've had over the years. We find out, and heads up, guys, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about all kinds of details about the book. So if you haven't read the book yet, maybe pause the video, come back to it once you've done that. But it's so much fun. It really is. We find out obviously where Forever and a Day comes from.
Yep.
We find out Bond's very first love interest and like where he was really going kind of prior to Vesper, which kind of explains why he was so very hesitant with Vesper at first. And I don't know if that was intentional because there definitely was some hesitation with Vesper. But my favorite thing is the martini. We finally understand why he gets the martini shaken and not stirred. And,
right.
Chris, what did you think about that element of the book?
It was interesting. There's a few times I was like, oh, that's a cute nod. One really stood out, and I didn't sit particularly well with it when she was like, oh, you like to condense it massively. It's like, oh, you should try smoking Moorlands. And I was like, okay, that's a bit ham-fisted. Like, quite a few of them I enjoyed. The Shaken Not Stirred was very sort of like natural. The Moorlands one stuck out a bit too much for me. But again, because it was, because of as massive Bond fan, books and films, when you see those nods, it wasn't like some other like franchises that we won't go into where they're like, hey, look, here's a reference exactly for you. Some people would have read this and not got the Moorlands reference. Everybody would have got the Shaken Not Stirred reference, obviously. So it's at the end, it was judging a fine line, but I must say the Shaken Not Stirred, that did give a bit of a smile.
I really enjoyed them also. They definitely kind of brought a little bit of smile to my face as well. The only thing that I would say negative about them was the reason she got her martini shaken and not stirred was basically to spite her ex-husband. Sure, he could enjoy a martini shaken, not stirred now that he's tried one, but then kind of diving deeper into why he had that order was because it was to spite this lady that he now loves his ex-husband, and it's like,
I'm right there with you. I really am. I thought it was a little like uh, so he so one of the most famous lines in film history and novel history comes from A Spiteful Marriage. It was like, I don't know if that was if I'm fully sold on that.
I don't know. That's so Fleming, though, isn't it? If you think about so many of the things he's done where that comes up, that hit me as a very Fleming touch.
You're not wrong.
That's what I took away from it.
No, and for that I love it. It's got that kind of cringe to it, but then you're like, well, okay, there's some nostalgia here, so okay. And I think we all do that with just the Bond stories in general. There's times and moments where we're all kind of like, all right, I see what you did there. I'm not okay. I will let you have that one. All right. So for me, typically when I read the novels, and this has happened every single novel I've read, doesn't matter who starred in the movie, I always picture Connery. It's just a thing I've always done. I feel like, and I've talked to other people like, Jocelyn in the Bond community for Ladies Who Bond, Mel, her and I have talked about that with James Burb. I think everybody kind of has that person that they go to when they read. But for me, this time around, 100% Craig.
Yep, I agree.
100%. I could not see Craig the entire time. What about you, Chris?
I'm about to say, the first Bond book I read was Moonraker, and that's so radically different from any expectations. It kind of formed this, like, not completely, tangible blob in my head of what Bond is. And as a result, every Bond book has always had him in it. It's almost like another Bond, a literary Bond. And there are times where certain bits remind me of certain actors, and I go, "Oh, that's very Connery, that's very Lazenby, that's etc. etc." But there's always the default is always this formless man who I've never really attempted to look too deep into, but he's there. I think you're right with the Craig comparisons of some parts in this. I mean, it's aided by Casino Royale, the film, obviously, because there's some little bits there where it really ties in. I think for me, it's still a case of the extra Bond for me, which is an amalgamation of so many different Bond things.
Awesome.
Okay, so you kind of get like that faceless spy that just kind of ambiguous, doesn't exist.
Well, that's the thing. I find I get him if it's reminiscent of Fleming. If I've read something that doesn't stand out too particularly well, then I do get a particular Bond. I read the Raymond Benson Tomorrow Never Dies or whatever it was. And obviously Tomorrow Never Dies is, of course, Brosnan. But the way he writes it is clearly him. So I feel like if actually I'm getting this formless blob person, I'm not thinking of someone individually, it means it's kind of suitably Fleming-esque in some ways. I mean, I've read other spy books where I'm like, oh, I'm now imagining Pierce Brosnan, and that's it. No mention whatsoever.
Right. No reason, just, well, Brosnan would do that, so therefore it's him.
I'm not gonna lie, it really made the Hungry Caterpillar a difficult read.
Very nice. All right, Blake, over to you. Like, we've talked about this before with Trigger Mortis, but for this one, where were you? Where was your head at?
Usually I see Connery just like you do. For this one, I saw mostly Craig. I think the main reason was, throughout the book, and you already said spoiler alerts, like we see Bond kind of slip up as he's learning. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but really Connery's my main Bond. But you never really see Connery mess up because he's just always 110% on his game. But at Casino Royale, we do see Craig's Bond kind of learn as he goes a little bit. And it's not till, more towards the end of Quantum of Solace where, I can't even remember the specific line that M tells him, but it's like, now you've learned. And so, then he's on his game. Yeah. But here, it's a coming of age and he's learning. So it's very Craig in Casino Royale for me.
Yeah, he was very fallible, I felt like, throughout this entire book. We got a very rough, around the edges, brutal, someone that you could and was kind of taken by surprise several times.
Yep.
And I feel like I loved that element. And that does deviate from Fleming, because I know Fleming was very, what's the word I'm looking for? He was very adamant that the Bond stories were to be about a man who was already established. And so to do this prequel really does deviate from anything that Fleming would have really kind of wanted to see, I think. So I felt like this was definitely a step off of a different ledge for Horowitz to kind of take on. But I feel like, just kind of rounding out here, I feel like it worked so well.
Yeah, I thought he knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, he really, really did. All right, so question number 2.
So my question was, what did you guys think of the pacing in this book? There's 3 very distinct acts. How do you think it was all stitched together? Blake, let's kick off with you.
I thought that it flowed pretty well together for the most part. I guess I would consider myself still relatively new to reading books. I never really read books too much when I was growing up, so I started reading the Bond books about 3 years ago, and I've kind of made my way through most of them. So I really only have Bond stories as far as a checkpoint to see how they flow. But I enjoyed most
the
of
best
it.
of the best.
Yeah, of course. Of course. There was a bit, I think, around the time when they go and they check out the ferrochemics, or however the factory is. And it kind of sputters a tiny bit, but the majority of it I thought flowed relatively well, at least in my opinion.
How about you, Chris? How did you find it?
I really enjoyed the flow of this because we got that scene with M. I loved how we get introduced to Tanner and M and Bond's first time with M, and how there was these little subtle things of like, oh, we've seen each other in the elevator before, and like we've talked about the weather slightly, but now it's like I'm going into the inner sanctum. Horowitz put this right perfectly in the right period. We are in the French Riviera around 1950. I love the fact that we get the mercenary that's working for the CIA and Reed Griffith. I love the fact that we get, the Corsican gangster. We've got a lot of really colorful characters in this entire plot that kind of helps move the whole story along. We have some solid Bond tropes. Now, we really didn't get gadgets. And so for me, I was kind of like, that was something that was a little missed. And I thought that this would have been the perfect opportunity to kind of implement some of those, but at the same time, would it be ahead of itself? And so maybe that's why it was looked at.
That thing with the gadgets in particular, it struck me, obviously, when Casino Royale was written, gadgets weren't really focused on that at all. And not really until, I say, Russia with Love, I guess you get something that comes along that way. So I guess it's kind of keeping up with the times. And as you say, if he'd gone straight in with that, it would have been ahead of itself. And we're talking about how well it's stitched together. It's got to stitch together with the rest of the Bond canon as well, which is a very difficult thing to do. Personally, when it came to it, I found the first act fantastic, third act fantastic, and something that's consistently a problem with this type of book is the second act really dragged for me. It became a bit saggy and very expositional. As Blake was saying around the factory, that bit I started remembering I was turning the page and I was like aware that I was reading the book again. And I think one of the reasons for that for me is because the part which I would say is probably the end of the first act is one of the best Bond scenes I've ever read. That part with the acid, that was edge of my seat reading. That was absolutely phenomenal. And that's the thing. I went into it being like, he's not going to throw it. Holy shit, he threw it. And that was, for Horowitz to write that, was absolutely incredible. And it's very reminiscent of Horowitz's writing in the Alex Rider series, which I don't know if you guys have heard of in the UK.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I read all of those books as a kid and reread them when I was working at school a couple of years ago. And when it comes to action, he writes very much in the same way as he did for that series as he does for Bond, obviously with just a bit more intrigue and stuff. And bizarrely, in those books, the bits where it sagged was the exposition. So even though it's writing at a very different age demographic, it's interesting how that still turns up. Right. So I do find that might have been a bit of a Horowitz problem. I've not yet read A Mind to Kill, so I'm intrigued to see if he's on top of that problem yet. I bought it in the UK, bought it over to the States, and I still haven't read it yet.
Trust me, it's we'll talk about that later, I promise. But it's it's definitely worth your time. You nailed it on the head. Stitching the plot together, not only for the book itself, but to keep it within the canon, that is a challenge that not a lot of authors are successful with. And we have seen that over time with some of the authors they've brought in to do novels. Devil May Care, I'm going to go ahead and put that one out right now. I don't even, everybody watching at home, I will never do a review on Devil May Care. It is hands down my least favorite Bond book I have ever read. I was almost mad when I finished it.
Oh,
I
no.
was just like, a guy who plays tennis with a freaking monkey paw. Are you kidding me? Like,
There was
anyway.
The one book that had me like that was for Special Services, where the main item was mind control ice cream. And you read that and you're going, Jesus Christ.
We have gone completely off the rails. All right. So, and I love the fact that, we get so many different colorful characters in this book. So Chris was talking about like the different acts throughout the book. And, I felt like Act One, you're very right. When they're introducing all the characters, I didn't feel so much like it was going through the motions of the introductions, even though they were happening. The storytelling was dynamic enough to keep me moving, and I wasn't noticing it nearly as much as the second act. The second act was that kind of, okay, we're pushing through now. We got to get all this information to get to Act Three, and okay, now it's awesome again. Okay, here we go.
I think the main part that, even though Act One was kind of slower, I think the part that helped us get through it was we were so eager to find out and meet Bond and or I guess I should say more eager to meet the new 007 and kind of see how they introduced him and how he ended up getting his 00 status through that second kill and all that stuff. All right. So this one I'm going to start with you, Bearded Blofeld. The Bond himself in this book, did you enjoy this version? Thus being, younger, less experienced, new as a 00. What did you think of that?
I did. And I guess we kind of talked about this briefly earlier, but seeing the even less experienced than Casino Royale version, the Bond who definitely was more of kind of the commando, if you will, rather than the commander. He was really a lot of run and gun. He had a lot less thought into some of the decisions that he made throughout the book with people, and Horowitz was really good about that. Even though, and I think one of my favorite scenes, just the way it played out, was when Bond goes to investigate the apartment, and he's talking about something is off, and he's talking about the footprint. Now the footprint was facing the wrong direction, but the fact that he even noticed the motorcycle pulling up and never thought that person may have been coming to where he was at. That's one of those moments where it's like, you're close. You're using the ABCs of spy school that you went to, but you forgot the more experienced element of, I should be paying attention to all of my surroundings. So I enjoyed this Bond. I thought he was a lot of fun. He was very daring. He was brave in a lot of points that we needed him to be. But the fallible points just really made him be a standout in the book.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Chris, British Bond addict? What did you think?
I was pleasantly surprised because going into this and knowing it was, Bond's Bond's first assignment, I was fully expecting like Three Stooges, slips on the banana peel, like knocks out Felix whilst moving a plank. And I'm glad that the mistakes that they did. Sorry.
Thank goodness Felix wasn't in this book, because he would have gotten a 2x4.
He got me. He got me on that one.
I should have said read, right? Surely, because that's kind of that. But yeah, going through it, I was expecting it to be a bit OTT on him being a novice. I'm kind of glad that they actually kind of explained how multifaceted being a spy is. And as you said, you basically hit the nail on the head. That he's like, aha, I've got this. But then obviously they're not noticed the thing that somebody would later on notice. And that's
right.
so interlinked with so much of Bond. Like when you watch Dr. No, for example, he's going through putting talcum powder on the briefcase, putting the hair out, like that sort of stuff has to come naturally. And of course, it makes logical sense that it would be difficult to move into that. And I must say, the ending of the book as well, that worked out quite majorly. Like, I don't know how well it fits with the rest of Bond book canon, especially his feelings towards killing. But the ending and that last line, which was like pitch perfect, I think in the grand case of things and the situation as a whole, and also the first betrayal, which is such a theme in the Bond like media. Yeah. It was nicely handled, and I was pleasantly surprised. the fact he was novice was, it was mentioned, it was there, but it wasn't so obvious. It wasn't the point of the book, which is the most important thing. There was a story and a narrative. There was narrative being told. And I was worried personally that it's going to be Bond's training wheels. So that was quite nice.
Yeah, definitely. I think you guys both hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, Chris, what about you, buddy? Or Blake, sorry.
I enjoyed it thoroughly. Being in law enforcement myself, and every job I'm sure is the same way, but especially law enforcement, as much as you can go to school for it, as much as you can train or be taught things, it's totally a learn as you go type of thing. It's totally learn on the job. I've been on something where it could be very minute or very simple, but because I've never dealt with that before, I've totally, not to the point of it being like a horrible accident, but I've fallen on my face before. And that's how you learn. Then the next time you don't make that same mistake. I thought that it was really, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. I feel like that's where, for me, just growing up with Bond in general, that is a lesson within itself that these books teach you, just as a person. It's like, hey, pay attention in life. You're going to make mistakes, but it's learning from those mistakes. And I feel like that's one of those, just like I said, key lessons that the Bond novels teach you.
I must say as well, something Horowitz utilized perfectly was using that to heighten tension and drama. Like when you think of Bond and I mentioned this before, that amazing scene, the acid / water. When you think of that being his first mission, his first assignment, all of that, it raises the tension somewhat. Like, oh, I'm out of my depth, guys, and it just raises the tension in such a way that you can't help but like not emphasize, because I've never been stuck in a chair with potentially boiling acid flowing at me, but you could imagine.
Give it time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm sure my students will eventually do that to me at some point. But yeah, it makes you think. It kind of just heightens it, because obviously when he's a trained professional later in the movies, books, whatever you will do, he knows what to do. He knows how to get out of this. Here you're like, oh, shit, that poor kid.
And to that point with that scene, the one thing I also enjoyed was, even though he's still learning, he still had his, his quick tropes of, even in the face of danger, I can't remember what it was that he said, but he said something back to Scipio where it was just like, almost like, do your worst, whatever. Even though inside he's like, crap.
Yeah. You can't show that weakness in that scenario. You're dealing with a full-blown mountain of a man gangster. I mean, you can't be like, please don't hurt me, Mr. Man. He's...
Well, that's there's also some elements to Bond which can't have been taught. There's some things which are just so natural about it, and to have that there is a nice kind of reminder that yes, he is learning so many of these things, but there's an aspect of Bond that is just him.
All right, Brit, you want to kick us off with question number 4?
Who's your favorite character, and of course why? I went to Blake last time, so I'm gonna be fair. Bearded Blofeld, you're up.
All right, hands down, my favorite character has got to be 16. She, to me, was a breath of fresh air to the franchise when it comes to what a lead female character really can be. And I say that comparing her, really, I feel like the only one that stands up to her is Pussy Galore. Because it's just such a unique relationship that they develop over time. Like her background, and she's already been through working for the government, and now she's being involved with other major key players in the crime syndicates, and now being a mercenary on her own and just kind of working as a gun for hire and a go-between, selling secrets to different whoever the highest bidder is. That's exciting. That is a lifestyle that we have not seen in a female Bond character really to date, if I'm speaking correctly here. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys, can you think of any other female lead that's been through that level of character depth?
The only other thing that I could think of, maybe, and it wouldn't be in the novel, would just be obviously an Octopussy with Maud Adams. I can't remember the name of her, but her character obviously just being a more mature, kind of already well-off set female lead. But I think, as much as in all the Bond films there are strong female Bond girls that are independent in their own ways, Pussy Galore and Madam 16, I think, almost are in a league of their own with Like, as much as I don't want to call them independent, because the other Bond girls are independent as well, but these two are just leaps and bounds. Like you said, they've already had years of experience with, crime syndicates, with their own espionage type experience and roles.
Right.
And yeah, I think those two by themselves are just, again, in a league of their own with that.
Well, and the big thing for me that stood out with her, and I'm going to go ahead and pull some pictures up here for you guys now. But the couple things that I wrote down here is the fact that she was actually scouted by the SOE in 1943, according to Horowitz. I wasn't exactly sure what the SOE was. Buckle up. If you don't know, like I had no idea. The Special Operations Executive was a World War II organization whose purpose was to conduct espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance behind enemy lines. So SOE trainees had to face some of the harshest conditions on the planet. So they prepared by basically going through all of the rugged terrain that you can imagine. They were actually trained in the Scottish Highlands. And let me share this real quick. Chris, you probably already know this because you're a teacher and you're smart like that. But
I'll take it, thank you.
But this image right here, this is actually the Iveraliat house. I'm going to totally slaughter that. And this is the actual facility where they did training for the SOE in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was pretty impressive that this is the actual facility that, they're cranking out real spies back in the day. And that was in 43.
That's something I recall as well. Something about the SOE that was pretty significant was the amount of, I think they called it something along the lines of like mental fortitude training. But there'd be rooms in there where, like, obviously with permission because they're in training, incredible things, like some things which at one point wouldn't even bear repeating, but just ways to see how they can make people crack and see if people would actually live up to it. And at that point, obviously with World War II and obviously with Britain, and under Bonquit, with Britain being a rather naked little island, over there, it was dramatic. And at that point, obviously, I think when they were formed, it was before the Polish and before many of other Europeans and the Americans came to help out too. So there's some significant stuff happened there. And I'm sure there's some documentaries or some rabbit hole like reading that will give you some nightmares.
Oh yeah, but I love the fact that Horowitz took the time to include that level of detail into the character development of her. He didn't have to go into that. He could have just said, well, she was in espionage. But the fact that he really mentioned that organization, it's like, well, hold on, what is that? I'm fiddling through the internet and I'm like, oh, that's a whole nother level right there, buddy. No, I think 16, like I said, the fact that, she was an older woman, dark brown hair, she was very elegant. I love the way he described her at the card table where he said that she is poised. That was like, ooh, that just set the tone right there of like the type of woman and person that this is. It's not somebody that you want to just approach lightly.
Yeah.
So, but I did have a bit of a fan casting for her because I started thinking to myself, and I came up with a few other cast members here that I want to talk about shortly. But when it came to Madame 16 Brochet, I looked up Elodie Young, and I'm going to go ahead and share that now as well. I feel like she is a French actress that really, really kind of sets a standard and has exactly the look I can imagine for what 16 would be. Her age, her experience, everything is pretty much right on par with who the character is. And I feel like that would be a strong candidate if they ever were to do this, because we're heading into Bond 26 Blonde, and none of us really know what's going to happen. And I've got my fingers so crossed that it is this book that they choose.
Yeah,
I'm 100% with you. I think that this would be an amazing choice to go for the next movie.
Yeah. It's actually interesting you said that, because the point I was just looking up, which I was going to mention earlier, would work quite well. Anthony Horowitz was the writer of a very successful British series called Foyle's War, which was set about the Secret Service during World War II. So obviously, sometimes he writes to his advantage and writes what he knows. Obviously, he's written for TV. He's written for film. Obviously, I mean, getting his book and getting him involved too would be a bit of a masterstroke if you think about it.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That'd be wonderful. Have him do like the screenplay of his own book.
Exactly. I mean, he is a self confessed like Bond nerd. He absolutely loves this sort of stuff. And during his Twitter, back when he was writing it, he tweeted the 7th word when he wrote it, the 1007th word, the 2007th word, every single time he did it, because he was just enjoying it so much. And obviously each time he gets permission from the Fleming estate to obviously write this, and he is still including original work by Ian Fleming in each of his books. Obviously the amount is rather small, but I know both Trigger Mortis and Forever and a Day did have actual Fleming work in each of them. Yeah,
and so did With a Mind to Kill.
Did it as well? I wasn't sure on that. Okay,
it did. Yeah. All right, Blake, what about you, buddy?
I'm 100% with you. I think that Madam 16 was my favorite character. Obviously Bond is enjoyable, but for the book, Madam 16 is definitely the star of the book for me, and for pretty much all the same reasons that you said. I think, she gives us a lot of those Bond tropes that we know throughout the rest of the series. She's basically like training and molding Bond. Like you said, she's poised in the casino when he initially meets her. And then it's kind of funny too, because Horowitz makes a point to be like, she's nothing like a woman I would ever be attracted to. And then it's like a 5-minute conversation over martinis. And then all of a sudden he's just like this.
Yeah. Right. Like you see like the old Tom and Jerry cartoons where the eyes are all like.
Yep. Yeah, he's like, nope, now I'm in love. For me. What about you, Brit?
As you may have guessed from someone who's adorning my board, I quite like the fun aspect. And while 16 I thought was very good, I must say there's something about Scipio. I just love reading every single page he was on. I mean, obviously Fleming does a huge thing of his Bond actors having like deformities, all this sort of stuff, and it's not something that here. I don't know why, but adding in the interpreter, I loved it. I thought that was such a neat, novel idea. And like you said, 16, something that hasn't really been done in any way, shape, or form. And with the intimidation of, I'm talking about it again, this is the third time, with the intimidation of that acid scene, it really just elevated his character. I was a little bit annoyed at how he passed at the end. I would have liked maybe a bit more detailed depth, perhaps. And I was afraid that Wolfe started taking some of his roles as well. But every single time, like I turned the page, and when you turn the page, your eye kind of flicks past. Every time I saw his name, I was like, "Oh, yay!" Yeah. But no, I don't know why. Every time he's on the page, I just really enjoyed reading that part. So I'm probably going to side with him actually. Griffith was close, but I think the reason I liked Reed so much was because of the ending. I think if you'd asked me before the last chapter, I'd have been like, yeah, he was alright. And by the end, I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So I think that might have been part of it.
That was such a good twist. Such a good twist.
Let me ask you guys this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead.
So when did you guys, if you ever did you guys get a vibe that Reed Griffith might be a bad guy?
The issue is I've talked about this with quite a few people. I deliberately do a thing with media. If it's a film, if it's a book, it's a video game, I deliberately read it done. And I stop myself from thinking about what's going to happen in a few pages' time. Because the issue is your mind can think of every possibility. And while I'm sure some people are going, cool, I knew that was going to happen, I deliberately try to prevent that from happening because I like the elements of something happening. And so every time there's like, oh, he could be suspicious, I'm like, cool, we keep that there. I don't delve into it any further because I want to read it as the author, the filmmaker, the producer intended. So I must say there are a few times early on where I was a little bit suspicious. I mean, it couldn't have been Felix Leiter, obviously, for numerous reasons. And I think that'd be the second time reading it, you notice it very early on. I definitely noticed that knowing what the ending was. I'd like to say back in 2018, the first time I read it, I was probably blissfully ignorant. That's why I'm skipping through the book, all is great, and then oh my god. So
yep. Reed Griffith was the Felix Leiter. He was like, insert Felix Leiter. But I loved the twist at the end, and I don't know. There was something about him, and bear in mind, the first time I read the book, because I've read it twice now. The first time I read it, I actually physically read the book. The second time, where I went back and was taking notes for this, conversation, I actually did it on Audible, and that is a completely different experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It really is, and in almost in some ways a better way, because the person who read the book and I apologize, I don't have their name, but they did voices. They changed their voice as they changed character, and I thought that was brilliant. And when they kept reading for Reed, I'm just going to show you. Every time Reed came on, this is who I saw, and I can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw Bradley Cooper. And it was like,
definitely.
And I kept thinking to myself, I was like, man, Bradley Cooper would have absolutely crushed this role.
Yeah.
He has that like likable personality, but he's got that dark side to him too that could come in from out of nowhere and just smoke you. And that's exactly what Reed was. He played both sides. So I thought Reed was a great character too.
I like in the ending he never actually formally admits it. There's no like monologue sequence or anything like that. It's still, there's a little bit of ambiguity. I mean, but I like that he's never formally admitted it, so therefore making Bond's actions seem all the more impulsive. I must say, to also follow on your point, if you when I read books, I read them quite quickly, as in like I go through the page quickly and I don't really dwell on it. You have to dwell when you listen, and sometimes that can really elevate the experience. I know it's not for everybody. There's some people who can't stand listening to audiobooks, but for me, when it's a car ride home and you can put that on the 45-minute commute, bellissimo.
Did you have anybody in mind? Blake, I'm going to ask you first. I know I'm going to leave Chris for the end because it's his choice. But Blake, when you were reading, did you have anybody in mind for Scipio?
A specific actor? I don't think so. Like as far as a person, but it sounded basically it was described almost like the cartoon of Kingpin from Spider-Man.
Yes.
In my opinion, like that's what I pictured.
Yes.
But who could actually play that role? I couldn't think of any specific actor off the top of my head that could play that role unless it was a cartoon, and then it would just be a drawing of Kingpin.
Right. Bro, what about you? Do you have anybody in mind?
This is going to be a really peculiar one, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
There's an actor from a TV show from the 60s, which I love. The TV show is called The Prisoner, and one of the main bad guys is somebody called Liam McKern. Now, Liam McKern has like this like big squint. He's got this like loads of hair. And even though I read all, as you say, the Kingpin features, that's a superb shout. Even though I read all the Kingpin features, he's still propped into my head. And at that stage, I was like, oh, screw it, he's there now. I'm not going to get rid of him. And that really stuck to me.
I was with Blake the whole time. I was just picturing Kingpin from the Daredevil series. I was just like, yeah, that, and just like you, Chris, you're just like, yep, I'm not even putting any effort of removing that image. That's just who it is. Moving on.
So, oh no. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like, all right, Blake, kick it off. Number 5.
This one I'll go to you first, Brit. Do you enjoy the new edition, or this as a new addition to the Bond canon, to the Bond series? What would you think if they kind of continued? And like we discussed a little bit earlier, maybe if they made this one into a movie.
This is a tricky one, because writing a prequel to Casino Royale and all of that is, my God, that's a tough ask. I don't think Anthony Horowitz could have done a better job in many of the aspects. The issue I find with the canon, especially if we're going to talk about films quickly, after like Daniel Craig's, kind of not origin story perhaps, but after his soft reboot, I personally would hate to see that again. And even if it's before Casino Royale, I don't think it's what it needs right now. The book worked beautifully. It fits in the canon well. I think the theme, like I was saying this earlier, obviously the fact it not only has to like flow within the book, it has to flow within the series, and it did that perfectly. Having read all of the Ian Fleming Bond books numerous times, this felt natural in so many ways. I don't know how it would work in the rest of the Bond canon. I would personally be happy if this stayed as just a piece of literature with a significant future, maybe retool the story. But for many parts of where Bond is right now, we don't need the origin story. I don't need to see how his parents died in the climbing accident. I don't need to see him. That's the best part of the one of the best parts of Casino Royale was seeing 00 status confirmed and 007. I was like, all the backstory I need. And also, there's a part that this is written well as a period piece. I'm not sure how well it would translate into the 21st century.
Ooh, I'm going to chime in there for a second because that has actually been in the rumor mill that if they're going to do a soft reboot, do they go ahead and just do a period piece film? Because if you look at the reboot of Man from U.N.C.L.E., you look at the Kingsman films, they are that fun. They are period piece films and they work.
Mm.
And I know a lot of people compared Craig's tenure. I heard a lot of people saying, why can't the Bond movies be more like the Kingsman movies? And I don't necessarily want to see it go that direction completely, but I understand why people make that comparison.
My one concern, if they do it as a period piece for the next movie, is just that then we're going to either stay in that period for the rest of that actor's time span. As much as I even already said earlier, I would love for this to be the next Bond film. I do agree with Chris where, like, at this point, are we going to now have to restart the series every time we pick a new actor?
Yeah.
That I do not want.
I think the thing as well, having talked to many fans, I've talked to many people who know James Bond but aren't fans in the way that we are. So many were like, well, Bond's dead. What are you going to do now? And I was like, well, he's obviously not dead. No time to lie, spoilers. This is just a thing. If they were to put out a prequel set in the 50s, I feel like that would massively confuse audiences unless they said, okay, this is now the 50s Bond. The thing I've always had in my mind is the thing that if the genie was in the lamp and I could rub it and it would come true, it would be that this would be a TV series. I would love to see this as an 8-episode Netflix, whatever series, 1 hour each episode. It would be perfect. That would be my call completely.
Ooh.
I could see that. That would be decent.
That's killer. That's a killer idea.
And the thing is, with Amazon taking over, have the traditional big blockbuster films that everyone likes set in the 21st century with gadgets, DB5 for some reason still, and so many famous celebrities, but also have the TV series, which is actually good. Bond goes back to his roots. Juggle both of those at the same time. Yeah. There we go.
Amazon, if you're listening, you've heard it here first on the Bond Report by the British Bond addict. Go.
We'll take 15%
each. Thank you.
15%. Thank you.
I mean, I'd drink up 50s Bond until like the cows came home. That'd be fantastic. I'll be all about that. And there's so many different angles you can go with it. And it's the breath of fresh air that would probably be. It would either work or it wouldn't, but for so many people, I'm sure it would.
Right. My only concern, and I think I brought this up previously, just in conversation, but the only challenge I feel like they would have that the Bond franchise has stuck with is branding. We've always got current branding, be it clothing, be it technology, be it vehicles, and by jumping back to a period piece era, Eon would lose all of it. And I don't know, and that's a big part of their payoff.
That's true.
I mean, if you recall, for No Time to Die, they had to completely reshoot the scene of Nomi and Craig when he throws her the cell phone, because by the time it came out, the new Nokia had dropped and they had to refilm it with the new Nokia to make sure it was current. So it's things like that that concern me, whether or not they could find other ways to make up those funds. Then, hey, great. But either way, I think that's the challenge they're facing.
That would make sense for sure.
Guys, so closing thoughts, overall, and I know we've talked about a lot of different things here today. Is there anything that, we didn't touch on that you're like, ooh, this was a standout moment for me. I really love this element of the book. Britt, let's start with you.
Bond getting really high. I must admit, that was an interesting read. I still find the way that 16 kind of saved it a little bit clunky in a way, especially with a bit of an understanding how some stuff works and making that, what's it called? Tourniquet?
Tourniquet.
Tourniquet, thank you.
And the bloodletting.
Yeah, and especially considering, what he's going through in his mind, all this jazz. And it was weird that he was like, I'm going to get you really addicted to drugs at that specific time. Like I don't know why. The whole thing, it's a fantastic little scenario, and I like how it played out. It did seem a little forced, for want of a better phrase. Like, oh, we need something shocking to happen to Bond. Let's give him a shit ton of heroin. I don't know why that stood out a little bit. However, I did enjoy reading that part of the book particularly. However, I would love to know your thoughts on it.
I thought, so you touched on it a little bit earlier, Brit, with the acid scene. That scene, as well as the scene where Scipio is basically explaining to him blow by blow what I'm going to get you addicted to heroin. Then every time you're coming off the heroin and you're wanting more, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. And then I'm going to give you some more. And it's just going to be a vicious cycle. And I was like, both times, how does Bond get out of this? And I thought that Horowitz did an awesome job of making it very detailed, very suspenseful, very scary for Bond. And then, again, we know that this is the beginning of his career. It's like, how is he going to ever continue with his career in espionage from here, with having to go through these two things? And so I thought that was both scenes had me on the edge of my seat as I was reading. It's like, I almost didn't even want to stop no matter what was going on. I thought that was really good.
Yeah. And I would challenge you, Brett, on that. You said you felt like it was a bit of we need something like a major challenge for Bond at the end there. I felt like that was actually very natural feeling because they got him on a boat. The boat is the heroin. We knew the boat had the heroin on it. And they explained that that's what they did with the previous agent and other people when people have tried to infiltrate their business while they're in the process of shipping this product. Well, it's like, well, let's just make this real easy. We're going to turn you into a junkie, whoop your ass for a couple days, and you're done deal, buddy. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know what it was. I think perhaps because that part of the hydrochloric acid was so hydrofluoric, whichever one it was, that it was so good. I felt like it was trying to reach that level again, which might just be me reading it, because I was like, that's such a good high. I was like, oh, they're trying to do that again, and it's not quite working. I think it's a well written scene.
One thing I will say about that scene that I do want to touch on, if you recall, when they started screaming for the guards and the guards came in, and 16 was like, he fell. There's so much blood. He was laying in the puddle of blood that she had created when she bloodlet him. I was like, that's so genius. And it was so subtle. It was so, like, they didn't really explain where all the blood came from. That was a really good use of a bad situation that they turned into. And that's spy novels. That's spy writing right there.
Yeah, and that kind of, again, our love of Madam 16, that shows again her experience, her knowledge, her ability to kind of improvise to the bad situation to work for their advantage. I thought that was really good too.
If you had to rank the 3 Horowitz books, how would you rank them? And that's open to either of you, whoever wants to start first. Because of course I've not read Mind to Kill, but I know for me, it's definitely Forever and a Day, Trigger Mortis.
Mine as well. And then I think, honestly, and I think Chris likes With the Mind to Kill a little bit more than I do. I enjoy all 3, but for me, it's Forever and a Day, Trigger Mortis, With a Mind to Kill. Ooh. All of them being relatively high, but this book, like we talked about the entire hour we've been on, I just really enjoyed this one. And Trigger Mortis was another one that was really a unique story and pretty good for me. So that would be the order that I gave for it.
After rereading this, I still got to give it to Trigger Mortis. I really, really like this book. I do. But Trigger Mortis checks so many boxes for me. I love sports cars and racing. And that, and obviously, Brit, I mean, you coming from a racing background, I know. I'm really surprised that that's not more up your list. But, we had Pussy Galore. We had racing. We had a really, really strong villain in Trigger Mortis. The whole concept of, like, you brought back elements from Goldfinger with the body paint. It was like, there was so much fun elements in that book for me. And it's not to say that this book wasn't, but they're just two different beasts, in my opinion. If I almost have to put them as a tie in many ways, But if I absolutely had to rank one over the other, it's Trigger Mortis, and it's just barely.
So that means Monticle is third.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
I would love to have both of you back to do that review as well. One last thing that I want to say on the closing, and I promise we're going to go ahead and cut this short because I know we've been on here for quite a while, guys. And for everybody at home, if you're still with us, thank you so much for watching this far. I really appreciate it. I know that we can kind of ramble on about some of our favorite things, and I hope these are some of your favorite things as well. But I have to say, my favorite part of the book was probably the funniest line in the entire book. And give me a second to find it because it's in my notes, and I have lost it.
You're right. This is the funniest line in the book.
Hey, oh, here we go. I found it. Okay. They're on the boat at the end, and Bond is coming out of his heroin. He's gone through this heroin trip, and he's just kind of like, he doesn't know what to think about himself. And he tells 16, he's like, we need to sink the ship. And her response is so brilliant. She says, sink the ship? How are we going to do that? Forgive me, James, but I forgot to pack a hand grenade. And I read that line, and I had to, I put the book down, and I just completely imagined this woman, trying to help this guy coming out of a heroin trip. And she's like, I'm sorry, I forgot to pack a hand grenade. What was I thinking? Get a hold of yourself, man. We're on a ship.
Yep.
I was gonna say I like the idea that actually she was like, oh shit, I forgot the hand grenades. And there's a flashback and it's her looking at Bloody Bond and the hand grenades. She's like, which one do I take?
Right.
Yeah, and what I was going to say was just trying to deal with somebody that's intoxicated or on some type of drug. It's like you can't reason with that person. There's no rational thinking. So, is he fully out of that trip, or is he still in La La Land? Where it's like, oh, we're just gonna blow the ship up and sink it. And so to your point, it's like the sassiness. So he's like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Let me just grab this hand grenade and we'll sink the ship. We'll sink this huge cruise ship with the one hand grenade. Let's do it.
Yeah. No big deal. Yeah.
Not even gonna
Let me
argue
just
with
grab
you.
that. Yeah, let me get my handbag. Oh wait, I don't have one because we were captured. So I thought that was absolutely worth mentioning. Great follow-up question, Brit. I think Horowitz really captured the essence of Bond more than anybody in recent writing times has.
I think the thing that really sums it up as well is the fact he drops in Fleming's original material and you don't notice when you have no idea which part it is. The fact it's so
I know.
Yeah, that's what sums up for me. That entire story is such a nice niche Fleming sort of story, but I would have entirely believed if it had been Horowitz who wrote it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
so subtle.
Together.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Please be sure to check out the link over here. I'm going to try to put it over here somewhere where you can check out our previous book, Trigger Mortis, and that review. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, Merry Christmas, 007.